Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Terribly sorry to interrupt this lavish lunch. I just want to make one more announcement. If you're interested in submitting your work that you're presenting today to go into a special edition of the AFCU Journal, we need a date to figure that out. So if you let me know, and I know some of you are, so let me know, and I don't know, we'll pick a date when you're ready. And we'll put together a special edition of the AFCU Journal. I know when I tell that to my students, the date is usually, but I'm thinking sometime in the summer. And it's a great pleasure to introduce Mark Sickles. He has been our Linnaeus visiting scholar here at St. Bonaventure University for the last 2 weeks. He's come to visit and has delivered a number of lectures and has offered to deliver this plenary lecture for us. So it's great. I'm going to turn it over to you, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Michael. Well, first of all, let me begin by saying, boy, talk about stream of consciousness. 2 weeks have gone by so fast. I was actually packing yesterday because I'm busy today and I'm leaving early tomorrow morning. And I said, I feel like I was just unpacking to come here. And it's just been a remarkable experience. I had very high expectations, but they've been exceeded significantly. And I would just like to thank everyone here, but also just let you know, everyone from the very beginning has made me so welcome, feel so welcome. And you've been so kind and so gracious. And I can't thank you enough. I truly feel honored and blessed to have had this opportunity. And it's just been fantastic. So as you can see, we're going to talk about creating the right conditions for utilitarianism in the global business community. But would you bless me with the opportunity to perhaps lead us in a short prayer just before we get started? Okay, so let us pray. Dear Father, bless this amazing university community called St. Bonaventure. Bless this conference and all of the participants and Dr. Gallagher for putting it together. Bless this group of people assembled here right now, and bless this conversation we're about to have as we pray only for your knowledge, for your will for us, and the strength to carry it out. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's talk about creating the right conditions for utilitarianism in the global business community. And my inspiration for this topic was when I was reading Dr. Gustafson's background and saw that he has deep expertise in utilitarianism. And I thought, hey, I remember that from way back in the dark ages when I went to undergraduate school in my political theory class where we studied utilitarianism and with a focus on John Stuart Mill. So I thought, well, this is really directly relevant with the transformational shift that's going on in the global business community. And I said it to Dr. Gustafson, probably to one or two of you. I said, utilitarianism has always been in the back of my mind since those days when I learned it and I remembered it. But by reading it, it put it in the front of my mind. So when I go back now and engage in the .com community where I spend a lot of my time, I'm going to say, really, what we're talking about is shifting to utilitarianism. And I'm sure most people will say, well, what the heck does that mean? And then I can have a conversation about that. So thank you, Dr. Gustafson, for making that shift from the back of my mind to the front of my mind. I really appreciate it. So let's have a conversation as opposed to a presentation. And I've set it up that way where you can see I'm asking a lot of questions. So first of all, let me just say my definition of utilitarianism, and it's what I learned way back when we were studying John Stuart Mill. Very simply, the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people. Any comments or reaction to that? All right, so that'll be our context then for the conversation. There's a raised bar for business excellence. So let's talk about what that raised bar for business excellence, because as I said, it's really a calling for utilitarianism. The old standard used to be in business, our job is to create long-term shareholder value, whether you're a public or a private company. I worked for a few years for a family-owned business, and we had 2 outside directors. They never referred to the family. It was always the shareholders. And they said, it doesn't matter whether we're public or private, the shareholders deserve a superior return compared to what they would have gotten if they were making an alternative investment of comparable risk, whether it's a private company or a public company. The new standard is the sustainability synergy. So what I'd like to do in a few slides is have a conversation. What are the implications of this shift and this raised bar for business excellence? So first of all, when we say long-term shareholder value, what does that mean? It's a term everyone throws around, but sometimes when I listen, I'm saying, I'm not sure if that person is thinking the same thing when they say long-term shareholder value as what I'm saying. So anyone have any opinions, opening bids on what you want to suggest that term means?
Depends how you see it.
Say that again.
I would rephrase it to shareholders' value only instead of long term, because the value will take into consideration all possible benefits in the future, and that you discount them to today. But you can see the value. The value there perhaps is when you value the value.
I see what you're saying. In other words, you're bringing in, discounting it to get
Yes.
net present value.
In finance ways like the present value of all future cash flows.
Right.
So, but not like accounting profit where it's over 3 months or 6 months. And the long term, you should value it all the time. But by itself, the value takes into consideration long term benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. And in listening to you, Kelly, it brings up the distinction between current value added and future value added.
Yes.
So the overall market value added of the firm is a combination of the current value added plus the future value added.
Yes.
And again, the market value added of the firm is simply the value that management creates, what's often called the franchise value, above the book value of the assets. So if you look at the market value of the firm, the first question is, well, how much of that is current value added, meaning the present value of the continuation of your existing income streams, assuming they don't increase. And then the future added value is the value the market is putting on your company based on what they expect to be future increased income streams, which is a reflection of how well they think you can not only run the existing business profitably, but do what very few companies can do successfully, and that's actually grow it profitably. I'm sure you've heard the statistics about acquisitions. Some people say 60%. Some people, when I say 60, they say no, market's higher than that. It's more like 90% of all acquisitions destroy shareholder value. So a lot of people can run the existing business profitably, but they can't grow it, which means that their future value added is less than if the market thought if they could see a history of making strategic capital investments and actually managing them to be positive net present value initiatives. Great point. Thank you for making that distinction. Anyone else want to add something to this? So when I think about the term long-term shareholder value, it's important to keep in mind that you're not just managing for the quarter. Have you ever heard the term quarteritis? But you're managing for the long term as well as the short term, which kind of brings up strategic planning. You want to make sure that your strategic plan, which is what you're going to do today to make you more successful in the future, gets integrated into your operational plan, so that ideally the work everyone has on their desk is work that will make us successful in the here and now, and work that frankly will have an adverse effect on our profitability in the here and now, but if we develop these capabilities, will make us far more successful in the there and then. Make sense? So now, based on this definition, is long-term shareholder value utilitarianism, greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people. So to kind of go ahead.
I would say no, because you're limiting the people to the shareholders.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's right. There's 7 billion people on the planet. How many of those people are you positively affecting if you're just focusing on long-term shareholder value? Yeah. Anyone else want to add to that?
To be utilitarian is you have to add the stakeholders. Then that will be too limited if you talk from the point of view of the common good of society.
Exactly. Yeah, and so who are these stakeholders that Khalid just referred to? Are they the shareholders?
It includes.
It includes them. I always like the statement, let me see if I can say it correctly. All shareholders are stakeholders, but not all stakeholders are shareholders. So, okay, so I'm a shareholder and therefore I'm a stakeholder, but I'm hearing you say there are other stakeholders that aren't shareholders. So if I'm a shareholder, I'm saying, well, who are they? Who are they other than me?
Customers,
Customers, great. Employees, beautiful.
Communities that your business affects.
You're on a roll. You're on a roll.
Lenders.
Yeah.
Lenders
Lenders, excellent.
and Uncle Sam.
Pardon?
Uncle Sam, the government.
Uncle Sam, yeah, yeah. Government and regulatory agencies. Right? Yeah, they all have a stake in the company. That's a pretty good list. Anyone want to add to that? That's a nice list.
There's a certain sense in which you can add competitors to that list.
Oh, I love that thought. Go
There's a
ahead.
responsibility to the industry in some ways, to a
Mhm.
particular industry in some ways.
Yeah. That is really a great point. Say a little more about that.
Well, now I regret saying it.
And now your students. do.
Well,
No, the competitors are stakeholders in the companies not do well. That's how I think.
Well, they have a stake in whether each other does either well or poorly.
But
Yeah.
but they are not stakeholders in the well-being of the company.
Yeah, exactly. But what was your original comment that the competitors are in a sense stakeholders?
Yes, because they all have a stake, they all have a stake in each other in the sense that they're all part of a particular industry. And that industry has a supply base, and that industry has a lot of ancillary relationships, whether we talk about the industry's relation to the government.
Yeah,
It's never just on a firm, there's a lot of this, it's never just on a firm level, a
beautiful.
single firm level.
Beautiful. You reminded me, and I think I might have shared this in some of my earlier conversations, but right when we were having the economic crisis, in fact, I'm sure I did, I was chairing an event in the Middle East, and it was called the MENA Region Corporate Governance Congress. And they asked me to facilitate a conversation where we would develop a universal purpose of corporate governance that would have prevented the global economic crisis had it been in place and would prevent that type of thing from happening in the future. And I'm bringing it up because when we developed this definition, they said the key is a culture. The culture is going to drive our ability to create a more sustainable world. And the culture is made up of 3 types of values and standards. And at the threshold level, this group said is the ethical values and standards. And then that gets integrated into professional values and standards. So you think of all the different professional disciplines that make up an organization. And then those ethical and professional values and standards get integrated into, John, the point you're making, into the industry values and standards. So then you now have an industry that is an industry that basically is not only making money for the shareholders, but at the same time being a good corporate citizen on behalf of all the stakeholders. So at that industry values and standards, every professional discipline is performing at the highest level, and everyone in the organization is performing in a way that's ethical. But it was interesting, when I say ethical values and standards, what comes to mind? How would you describe ethical? If someone says to you, see that person over there? She's an ethical person. What do you tend to think about that person based on that description? Honest or dishonest?
honest,
Someone you can trust or someone you can't trust?
trustworthy.
Someone that's open and honest and transparent, or someone that'll tell you, I had a boss that say, this guy makes me nervous. I said, why? He says, he's the master of the half truth.
Yeah.
And so is a master of the half truth an ethical person? No. So I agree with all that, but this group came up with a different definition. This group said that ethical behavior is the intersection of individual competence and organizational integrity. How about that? It's the intersection of individual competence and organizational integrity. What are any of your early impressions when you hear that?
What comes to mind is a few years back, Frito-Lay had investments in a country, I think it was Myanmar. And in terms of social justice, and there were a lot of issues in terms of ethical, but injustices to the people. And all religious communities have investments, all right? So what some of the women Franciscan communities did was they got on their stockholder as a shareholder, voiced their concerns and got other people to lobby with that. And what ended up happening, and they boycotted all Frito-Lay products and investments. So everything from Kentucky Fried Chicken to Lay's potato chips to Pepsi. And it did cause PepsiCo to move out of that country. So in terms of what you're talking about, if the shareholders uphold their values and their ethics, can they make changes in that company?
Yeah, exactly. Great point. Any reactions to that? Yeah, so another, I think when this group was talking about that, I remember one person who was from the UK, he went on to say, he said, especially if it's a leadership role, if you in your heart of hearts know that you are not able to do that job at a level of excellence, it's unethical for you to actually accept that job because you don't have the individual competence to create organizational integrity. So that then begs the question, well, what the heck is organizational integrity? So when you say this building structurally has integrity, what are you saying about this building? Aren't you saying you're not really worried about the roof collapsing on us right now? So it's the same thing with organizational integrity. You say, if I'm in a leadership role, say, I'm only accepting this job because I know in my heart of hearts, I know in my head, my heart, my gut, I have the individual confidence to work on this business in a way that's going to enhance the performance of the people working in this business. So we're going to create superior value for our shareholders and stakeholders while dignifying the work of everyone that works here. And I can tell you, when you create that sense of dignity, that inspires and motivates people, and they put forth what my friends in academia refer to as discretionary effort, which is that effort employees don't have to give to keep their job, but they're putting forth that discretionary effort because they see the impact their daily work is having on the overall aim of the organizational system, and specifically creating value, not just for the shareholders, but making the world a better place to live. All right, so we decided that no, long-term shareholder value, because it excludes the stakeholders, is not utilitarianism. So let's move to the new RAISE standard, which is sustainability synergy. Anyone have a feel for what that means? It ties in, Dr. Fisher, to your comments earlier today when you were making the distinction between either or and both. Because when you I think there's a nuanced difference between synergy and synthesis, but they are related. But does anything come to mind for you based on your comments today about what the sustainability synergy is? In a way, we've been talking about it.
I'll pick on just the synergy part, I guess. And in my mind, it would suggest that somehow the sum can be greater than the whole of the parts.
We're beautiful.
2 + 2 = 5.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly right. By the way, does anyone have a feeling for what that nuanced difference is between a synergy and a synthesis?
Because synthesis combines things, but if you were thinking about it with mass, you end up with the same amount of mass at the end, as opposed to having grown it.
Yeah. So the distinction I would make is a synergy is when you take two things that are the same and you combine them and you get, as you said, 2 + 2 = 5. So if you said, well, Mark, give me a simple example. So two companies that are very similar combined, and let's say each one of them had 3 plants. Well, now you have 6 plants. Do you need 6 plants now that you've combined? No, you need, let's say 4. So you get to sell off 2 plants, you bring in that cash, you lower your charge for capital, and in doing that, you've increased shareholder value. And let's say you had 2 sales forces of 1,000 people each. When you combine the company, do you need 2,000 salespeople? No, you need maybe, let's say 1,500. So you outplace 500 people, lower your operating expense, increase your operating income, and you create shareholder value. And that's how you get 2 + 2 = 5. You basically, it's a synergistic or so-called a strategic acquisition when you say to the shareholders, trust me, you're going to be better off owning stock of the combined company than the 2 separate companies, because as Dr. Fisher said, we're going to take 2 + 2 and get 5. Whereas in my mind, a synthesis often referred, yes?
I don't want to interrupt, but what happens then to the 500? You've got 2 + 2 = 5, which is great, but then you got 500 people out of work.
Well, that's right. You do have 500 people out of work. So let's talk about that for a minute. Let's go off on a tangent, because I'm a former Fortune 500 chief human resource officer. And what I've often said, always said to the executives, look, we can take people's jobs, and sometimes it's our responsibility to take their jobs, but we can't take their self-respect and dignity. And you might get a kick out of this. I said that once to the president of our international business. And I said, we can take his job, and we should, but we should not take away his self-respect and dignity. And you know what he said to me? He said, geez, Mark, that sounds expensive. So what I'll say real quickly about that, somewhat counterintuitive, severance. When you pay people severance, is that an expense or an investment? If you understand what severance is, it's the latter. A lot of people, conventional wisdom, thinks it's an expense. It's an expense. Why is it an investment? Because you pay severance as much for the people staying as for the people leaving. Because the people leaving are the people staying, they're their friends. They know them, they care about them. And when they hear that the kind of financial support they're getting and the kind of professional support they're getting so they can transition from one period to the next, they feel good about the company they're leaving. I actually had someone on my staff once came to me and said, Mark, come into my office. And I said, what? I said, okay, fine. And there was this beautiful flower arrangement. She said, that's from the spouse of the man that I fired last week, because of the way we're treating them and helping them transition from one period of employment to the next. What's the purpose of severance? I just gave you the answer. It's an economic bridge from one period of employment to the next. And then you provide that with professional counseling to help that person make that transition. Very few companies seem to understand that. And what's the indicator that they don't understand that? They'll pay severance, and then even if the person gets another job, they'll keep paying them severance. I hired someone from a company, a fairly senior executive, and she got a year's severance from the company that she left. I hired her 1 month later. So for 11 months, she was getting a double salary. How does that make sense? It doesn't make any sense. But when you understand that the purpose of severance is an economic bridge from one period of employment to the next, let's say the person is eligible for 6 months or 1 month salary. It should be the earlier of, we'll continue your severance from the earlier of 6 months or 1 month, or until you become gainfully employed. Then guess what you get to do? Then you can effectively, in that person's example, I can now bank 11 months of her salary that I was ready to, severance rather, that I was ready to pay, but didn't need to, because her economic bridge from one period of employment to next was not a year, it was 1 month. And now I can bank that. And if someone is having a harder job, getting a more difficult time landing their next role, and let's say their severance runs out, then we can do what we did, and we contact them and say, I understand you're looking for a job. You say you're very diligent. Just want to let you know, we're going to continue your severance on a month-to-month basis. And if you think that doesn't create goodwill with that person and their family, you're wrong, because we get letters from people saying, thank you so much for doing that.
So before Mike brought up his point, I was thinking of it as synergy doesn't own, the 2 + 2 = 5. That extra to get to 5 doesn't mean you have to close 2 plus. So using your example, we had 2 companies, 3 plants. You put those together, you have 6 plants, and now you can sell off 2 and 500 people are out of a job. Or to me, I would think the way I like to look at it is you now use those 6 plants to do research and development and expand your market as opposed to getting rid of people.
Beautiful.
Synergy doesn't always have to be somebody's getting hurt. It can be you're making the organization better. So
I love
you
it.
don't have to move 500 people.
I love it. And I wish I'd had heard you said that 20 years ago, because whenever we've done these things, we were always looking at the synergies the way I described it. And we never thought about it the way you did. And we could have said, now that we have these 6 plants, what can we do that we couldn't do when we only had 3 plants? And I never thought about it before. So in my opinion, that's a great example of being creative and how to create more value for the shareholders and stakeholders without having the adverse effect on the people that I was describing. Excellent point. Thank you. Where were you when I needed you?
So tied in with what you're talking about, with Amazon workers unionizing and Starbucks unionizing in regards to what we're talking about, how do you think that's gonna affect separates, relationship, building another plant, cut that?
And you're saying all those firms are becoming organized?
In Buffalo, the Starbucks workers are unionizing, and in Long Island, Amazon is workers are unionizing.
How would you feel if you were a CEO of a company and you had a workforce that was not organized, meaning unionized, and then you found out that your employees felt that they would be better off if they were in a bargaining unit and being represented by a union? How would you feel as a CEO? That you would succeeded or failed? Failed. Why?
For employees who are unhappy.
Yeah, they don't trust you. Yeah, in fact, I had a boss who was quite a character. He was a fighter pilot in Vietnam, and he said, Mark, it bugs me that we're unionized. I said, why? He said, it says they don't trust us. And so one of the first things he did was he said, and you know what else bugs me? It bugs me that only the hourly people have to clock in, have to put their time clock in a clock. It says we don't trust them. He said, I'm going to have a ceremony, and we're going to come in, and we're not only going to take that clock down, we're going to physically destroy it. And then all the supervisors said to him, but how are we going to know if they're on work on? How are we going to know if they're at work on time? He said, if the only way you know they're at work on time is by looking at their time card, you're not doing your job. So he actually went after it, and he wanted to eliminate the unions, and he actually did that. And because he said, I don't like the fact that they feel they're better off being represented by a union than working directly with us. So I agree with you. I think it would be a huge failure if you had a workforce that wasn't organized, and then you had to organize, because look at all the infrastructure you now have to put in place to deal with the union. Now you need a labor relations function. Now you need to prepare for contract negotiations. Now you've got a collective bargaining agreement. And people are always saying, hey, you're violating the terms and conditions of the CBA, grievances, blah, blah, blah. All that stuff you don't have to worry about when you don't have an organized workforce. So think of the shareholder. Wait a minute, how much have you just increased operating expense because the employees don't trust you? A lot. That doesn't make me feel good as a shareholder. You blew it. And there's a great term. Have you ever heard the term called union avoidance? Union avoidance is a really important discipline, and it's the antithesis of rocket science. All you have to do is say, hey, if our workforce was organized, which would be the likely bargaining unit that would organize them? And then you answer that question, you go get their collective bargaining agreement, and you read it and say, well, let's just make sure we give our employees more than they would have gotten in this if they had this collective bargaining agreement. I have a colleague who was hired specifically, let me think for a minute, when Nissan moved to, I think, Tennessee, and they said, we do not want to be organized by the United Auto Workers. And they hired my colleague who was known for being a union avoidance expert. And he went down there and they opened that plant, and it's the only auto plant in the country that was not organized. But as I said, not rocket science, just look at the terms and conditions that they would have gotten and just give them more.
Well, and that's why we're seeing the new steel and auto plants being built specifically, not in the old Rust Belt towns, but elsewhere,
Yeah,
because they're avoiding the unions.
yeah.
That's why they're
But
going into South Carolina and Tennessee and other places.
I'll tell you, and also the board in those companies, the board is responsible for that. Because what's the number one responsibility of the board of directors? Number one responsibility.
Hire and fire the CEO.
Pardon?
Hire and fire the CEO.
Hire, and right, and implicit in that is hiring and firing the CEO to prevent failure. So that's what they're supposed to do. That's a failure. So the board should have been saying to management, here's what's not going to happen when I'm on the board. We are never going to be unionized, not when I'm on the board, because we're not organized now. And if we become organized, that's a failure. And I'm here to prevent failure. So the board didn't do its job either.
Go back to Paul's, like when you define, go back to your synergy. When you define synergy, it was never in absolute form. So synergy should always linked to the goal.
Yes.
And who sets the goal? So like if you are the CEO or the board, that synergy is like 1 + 1 = 4. What does it mean? The progress was the goal. But if you remove the goal, then we go back to Mike, where 500 people out.
Right.
So that's why people, when they look at synergy, it's always positive.
Yeah, exactly.
So they don't look at synergy at a negative point. So
Yeah, excellent point, which is consistent with your point. Yeah, great. Okay, so what is the sustainability synergy? I think in a way we've described it. So would someone like to read this? Carol, would you like to read that?
Sure. The creation of superior levels of sustainable shareholder value in ways that make a positive impact on economic, environmental, and social sustainability on behalf of all other valued stakeholders and vice versa.
And vice versa. So yeah, does any of that surprise anyone here? That definition, anyone want to make any comments, additions or anything, or ask any questions about it? Yeah, that's the key. Create value for your shareholders, but do it in a way where you make a positive impact on those 3 categories of sustainability, and that it is not a trade-off relationship, but it's a synergistic relationship.
but it is not guaranteed that it's synergistic, because sometimes the environment, the economic, or the environment and social can contradict each other. So sometimes you want to increase the economic value, synergy there, but at the price of the environment.
Well, yeah, exactly. And that's where synthesis comes into play. So when things are in conflict, then that's really an opportunity to create a synthesis. Hey, wait a minute. Right now, the way we're seeing things, creating economic sustainability is in conflict with environmental. How can we create a synthesis where they become complementary? But I want to be clear that when you say economic, that's different than creating value for the shareholder. That's a reference to the overall economy.
Yeah.
So for example, going back to the economic crisis, some of these financial institutions were creating mortgage-backed securities, which were making money for their shareholders, but but the adverse effect on the overall global economy was almost to destroy it. So, and they said, and Goldman Sachs was one of them, they said, hey, our job is to create money for the shareholders. And he said, and we're not responsible for the effect it has on the overall economy, environment, or society. And that's when people said, well, wait a minute, this clearly is not going to work, so we have to make a change. So yeah, it's not a trade-off, but why do so many people refer to it as a trade-off? I said in one of my talks, I don't think the gentleman's here, I said I participated in a 6-hour-long conversation, a webinar on this general topic, and I had 9 pages of notes, and I had the word trade-off written 36 times in my notes. And it was a 6-hour webinar, but about an hour into it, there was someone from BlackRock that was on a panel. And everyone's saying it's a trade-off. It's a trade-off. You have to balance between making money for the shareholder versus, and then we have to still do good for our stakeholders in terms of having a positive impact on the overall economy, environment, and society. And one person from BlackRock said, at BlackRock, we don't see it as a trade-off. We see it as a synergy. And everyone looked at him and stared at him for a little bit. But if he was right, then they were all what? Wrong. And one of my favorite expressions is, wrong is wrong, even if everyone is doing it. And right is right, even if no one is doing it. Well, everyone was doing trade-off. And they weren't comfortable with the possibility that they were all wrong. So they looked at him for a while. And then they just went back and started talking about trade-off as if he never said it. And so I probably had trade-off written maybe 10 or 12 times in my notes when he said it's really a synergy. But then I had it another 20 plus times because they acted like he never even said it. That should have shut down the whole conversation, right? They should have said, whoa, time out. We're all seeing it as a trade-off. You see it as a synergy. Synergy sounds better than trade-off. Share. And maybe you can have us have a transformational effect on how we're reviewing this whole thing. And there was even one person who's a leading person in the world on this topic. And that person said something that was totally counterproductive. She said, we need to get the capital markets to view sustainability as if it's as important as financial. What's wrong with that statement? Well, first of all, financial is a category of sustainability, financial sustainability. So when you say we have to make sustainability as important as financial, it implies that financial is not an element of sustainability. So that's the main thing wrong. And it also makes it sound like it's not a synergistic relationship. So yeah, it's not a trade-off. So is the sustainability synergy utilitarian? Greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people.
Yes.
Yeah. That's what I often refer to. That's a no-brainer. Of course it is. Let me do a little bit of fooling around here though, because we said long-term shareholder value is not like the sustainability is not utilitarianism. But let me just play around with this model with you for a couple of minutes and see if I don't change your thinking. So this is called the Great Place System. So you first create a great workplace. So what's a great workplace? I like using job motivational theory. It's a place that has variety, task significance, task identity, where people can link what they're doing on a daily basis to the ultimate goals of the organization. And closely related to task identity is task significance. Hey, when I do my work better than if I do it poorly, it has an impact on the overall success of the business. Does that sound significant or insignificant? Significant. So I've got variety, I've got task identity, task significance, and then you're giving me autonomy to the extent possible, as long as it doesn't have an adverse effect on our business model. And then you're giving me feedback. So that's a great workplace. And that positions you, but does not assure that you're going to have a great workforce. So what's a great workforce? Anyone have any ideas of a great workforce? You know that, anyone ever see that movie Miracle on Ice about when we won you're all nodding, right? How many have seen it, Miracle on Ice? If you haven't seen it, I encourage you to watch it. First of all, it's a great movie, but in terms of learning about what makes business successful, it's really important. And there's one scene in the movie where Herb Brooks is picking the players.
Tonight's the night.
Pardon?
Tonight's the night.
Right, exactly. Go out there and take it, right? And what he said to the advisory committee is he said, we're going to beat the Russians at their own game. They have a better system than everyone else. I'm going to build a better system than the Russian systems. So he said, all-star teams don't work. I don't want a team of stars. I want a star team. So when he was picking the players, his assistant coach saw the list. He goes, Herb, what's this? He said, that's the team I'm picking. And the assistant coach looked at it and said, yeah, but Herb, you're not picking some of the best players. And what did Herb say back to him? He said, I don't want the best players. I want what?
Best team.
I want the right players. It's a puzzle, and I want all the pieces that fit in the puzzle that make it a whole, so that it is 2 + 2 = 5. So I would just say real quickly, a great workforce is a workforce when your people have the technical skills. So the technical skills and the problem-solving skills, as well as the behavioral competencies that are designed to manage the systems in that particular structure to practice those shared values to achieve your strategy. When you've got that puzzle put together, that's a great workforce. And a great workforce positions you without assuring that you're a great place to buy for your customers. And a great place to buy positions you without assuring that you're a great place to invest. So let's say that you're, and I've run across these people, that you're one of these people that say, I don't care about being a good corporate citizen. My job is to create value for the shareholders. And they're usually a financial person. And I'll tell you that I was in a session once, it was a while back, and it was a morning breakfast. And it was mixed company, meaning men and women. And I just come back from, I think this trip I alluded to in the Middle East. And I was saying, boy, I said, it's very obvious that the rest of the world is much more serious about being a good corporate citizen than the United States. Well, this big man, like 6'8", and he had the size of the head of a pumpkin, and this big, deep voice. Again, it's 7 a.m. We didn't know each other. We never met anyone. He used a profanity, which I will not use, but he said, I could give a fuck about being a good corporate citizen. My job is to create value for the shareholders, and that's what I do. Ooh, tough guy, right? So, okay, tough guy. So you want to be a great place to invest for your shareholders, right? Yes, I do. I said, okay. So let's work it from the great workforce. All other things being equal, do employees want to work for a company that's a good corporate citizen or a bad corporate citizen? That's what we call a rhetorical question, right? It's obvious. So if you're not a good corporate citizen, tough guy, you're going to lose your best people to companies that are good corporate citizens, all other things being equal. And who's going to be left at your company? And people that no one else wants. And then, great place to buy. Don't customers like to support businesses that are good corporate citizens? I went to Chipotle once, and I noticed that one of the items on the menu wasn't, they said, we're not serving this item anymore. And they told you why. It was a pork dish. And he said, we did an audit on the pig farms, and they weren't treating the pigs as nice as they said they would. So we've canceled them as a supplier, and so it's off the menu until we get a new supplier. And that made me feel good. I said, they're treating those pigs kind and nice, at least up to the point where they get slaughtered.
They kill them. Yeah.
So, and that made me feel good. So you want to, but what if you're a bad corporate citizen and they can go buy the same product somewhere else? So are they going to? And if you lose your customers, what happens to your market share? Does it go up or down? Goes down. And if your market share goes down, what happens to your revenues? Goes down. You think your shareholders are happy when they see your revenue and your market share going down? Do you think they feel secure about the value you're creating being sustainable? And then going up to the last point, great place to invest. We've all heard about socially responsible investing, right? So what if you lose your capital because people say, hey, you know what? You're a bad corporate citizen, and I don't want to be supporting your business by investing in you and having you use my capital to run your business to be a bad corporate citizen. So I'm going to sell your stock and buy stock in a company in this industry sector that is a corporate citizen. So going back to tough guy, hey, tough guy, how can you really look your shareholder in the eye and say the value we're creating for you is sustainable if you're losing your best people, and you're losing your customer and your revenues, and you're losing your capital because the socially responsible investors won't invest in you? You can't. So let's ask this question again now. Is long-term shareholder value utilitarianism? If to create sustainable long-term shareholder value, I need to be a good corporate citizen to keep my best people, to keep my customers, and to keep my investors, don't I have to practice the sustainability synergy, even if all I really care about is creating long-term shareholder value? I would argue yes, and I'm doing a little bit of time management here. So I would argue yes, think about that a little bit. And again, you work through that model and say, yeah, even if all you care about is long-term shareholder value, if it's going to be sustainable, how can you really say it's sustainable if you're not a good corporate citizen? And I'm repeating myself, because you lost your best people, you're losing your customers, and you're losing your investors. That doesn't sound like sustainable shareholder value to me. So maybe when you look deeper into it, it's important. And I'm bringing this up because in a conversation I had somewhere along the way over the last 2 weeks, someone said, well, stakeholder value is becoming more important than shareholder value. And that doesn't sound like a synergistic view of it to me. And that sounds similar to that other person. We need to make sustainability as important as financials. I cringed when she said that. And so I said to that person, well, that's what I call a half-baked idea. I said, put it back in the oven and cook it the rest of the way. When you pull it out, you'll say, so really, if I really understand what sustainable or long-term shareholder value means, if I really understand it, going back to ethical behavior, if I really have the individual competence to build an organization of integrity, which implicitly means I'm creating long-term value for my shareholders, I understand that in this day and age, I can't deliver sustainable value without being a good corporate citizen. So let's talk about what's missing that needs to be present to create the right conditions for utilitarianism in the global business community. Is it a breakthrough? And if it's a breakthrough, by the way, what's a breakthrough? It's a term we've heard for years. Anyone want to throw out what they think a breakthrough is?
Cross the bridge.
I'll give you multiple choice. A level of performance that can be predicted by the past, or a level of performance that cannot be predicted by the past? Cannot. Okay. A level of performance that conventional wisdom says, yeah, I could see how you could do that. Or a level of performance that conventional wisdom said, you can't do that. No one can do that. The former or the latter? The latter, exactly. So when you set a breakthrough goal, implicitly something's missing that needs to be present for that breakthrough goal to become a reality. And maybe what's missing is a digital recombinant invention that's not only greater than the sum performance of the parts, but different and greater. Anyone have a feeling for what a recombinant invention is? It's really what all inventions are. A lot of people think an invention is when you invent something out of the thin air. But if you really look at the history of inventions are really finding something new in what already exists. And a lot of times it's taking things to get that conventional wisdom has considered separate and unrelated and weaving them together, what some people call it unifying complexity into elegant simplicity. And so I'm suggesting that what's missing is a recombinant invention that's different and greater than its parts that produces supervenience. Anyone familiar with that term? So supervenience is a breakthrough level of sustainable organizational effectiveness that you need to achieve the sustainability synergy. That's why everyone's saying, let's call it a trade-off. Why? Because then I don't have to transform my organization. I don't need a breakthrough in how we're running our organization or designing our organization. I don't need a supervening level of organizational intelligence, agility, and adaptability to do a trade-off. I can do that right now with my current capability. So if you all validate me that it's okay to view it as a trade-off because you're doing it as a trade-off, and we'll ignore that guy from BlackRock that talked about a synergy because we don't have the capability to manage it synergistically. That would require an organizational transformation, and that's scary and hard to do. So let's treat it as a trade-off. So yeah, we need supervenience that, as I said, that superior level of organizational intelligence, agility, and adaptability that actually supervenes on the people in the organization and enables them to do things they couldn't do outside that system. So let's talk about that a little bit. And I'm talking about the supervenience tripod. I was introduced to the St. Bonaventure community as an inventor. And this is my invention. And I'll tell you how I think I started becoming an inventor. It goes back to when I was at Colgate-Palmolive right out of grad school. And my boss said to me, Mark, don't ever come into my office with a problem with at least 2 proposed solutions. So I said, okay. So all of a sudden, I'm dealing with a severe problem, and I don't have 2 proposed solutions. So I went around and asked people that were older and had more experience than me, hey, I got this problem, but I can't talk to Bud about it until I have 2 proposed solutions. Do you have any proposed solutions? They didn't. So I went back to my office and, I got to solve this problem or I'm going to be in trouble. But I also have to come up with 2 proposed solutions. So what did I do? I do what humans can do. I invented them. I engaged my imagination and I said, what could possibly be solutions to this problem? I finally came up with this and I finally came up with that. And guess what? He actually liked one of them. So I made it up. So I guess that was my beginning of being an inventor. So once I learned about this breakthrough technology, where you make a declaration of a result that conventional wisdom says impossible, say, good, now I know it's a breakthrough. And then you ask the magic question, what's missing that if present would make that breakthrough goal seem like a reality? And then you do what's called pulling a future. You grab that future of that breakthrough goal and you pull it into the present. And so that's what I've done. So my invention is a digital total capital management toolkit, a system where we've taken 30 management principles, theories, and models that conventional wisdom considers separate and unrelated, even though they've all been proven individually to add significant value to a business, and we've woven them together. So we've unified all that complexity of 30 management principles, theories, and models into a single system. So now the old system was at this level. So that means you had positions and functions at the same level. They were aligned. But now we have a breakthrough system that allows you to do what conventional wisdom says is impossible. So what are the implications on what organizations should do with the structure, specifically the positions and functions? Leave them where they are or move them up to a level that without the system, they'd say, you can't do that. You'd have to be, and this is what people have said to me, you'd have to be a superhuman to do that. I said, well, without this system, you'd have to be a superhuman to do that. But I agree, but with this system, you can. But now, do they need this system to perform at this higher level? Yes. But if you leave them down at the old level, do they need this system to perform? No. They look at it and they say, well, that's neat, that's cool, but that's not the way we do our work. That's why so many companies spend millions of dollars on new systems that never get used because they didn't align system with structure. Believe it or not, people make that mistake all day, every day. So we don't make that mistake. We said, okay, given what the systems enables us to do, we can now have a single total capital management function instead of multiple intradisciplinary functions. And I'll show you what they are in a minute. And that single total capital management function is led by a single chief capital officer position. So now, because just look at that tripod, that stool. My old boss used to call it a three-legged stool. Some people don't like the implication of stool. So someone said, call it a tripod, Mark. I said, okay. So, but just imagine if you took one of those legs and made it 5 times bigger than the other two, but then you left the other two at the same height. Would you ever consider doing that? So why if you're a CEO of a company, why if someone took a system that's at a much higher level, why wouldn't you bring those other 2 legs, function and position, up to the same time where they need each other? And there's an interdependency, an entwined interdependent dynamic between those 3 legs of the tripod. And the overall result of that is what we've been discussing: supervenience, organizational intelligence, agility, and adaptability needed to achieve the sustainability synergy. So now they have to use that system. And someone earlier in a talk said, you know you're effective when people are pulling you or pulling what you're providing, as opposed to you pushing it. And when you raise them up, raise the position function up to a level that they can't do without the system, are they going to be pulling that system into their work, or are you going to have to push it on them? They're going to be pulling it, exactly. So creating the right conditions, coming down the home stretch here, creating the right conditions for utilitarianism in the business community. Quick review. John, would you like to read that?
Creating the right conditions for achieving this synergy is best accomplished by transforming governance, leadership, and management from intradisciplinary complexity into interdisciplinary simplicity.
Great. And would you do the next one?
The transformation elevates organizational capital to the level of supervenience needed to synergistically create sustainable shareholder and stakeholder value.
In a way, a quick review of everything we've been kicking around for the last hour or so. So here's what that magical transformation from interdisciplinary complexity to interdisciplinary simplicity looks like. So I'm sure you're all familiar with these functions, right? If you're the CEO, and let's assume you have a COO, and so all the business units report to her, what's left reporting to you? The finance function headed up by the CFO, HR headed up by the chief human resource officer, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see the gaps there. So clearly that's interdisciplinary, and as it says, they're siloed and independent. And another interdisciplinary, siloed, and independent pre-total capital management, pre-supervenience view is something you're probably less familiar with, but I'm sure you've seen it. It looks like this. And these 6 things, the person I alluded to earlier, that was the creator of this drive for integrated reporting, his name's Professor Mervyn King. He's been the leading authority in the world on governance and sustainability for the last quarter century. He says these things need to be integrated to the point where they become inseparable. That's a big word for him. So when he says inseparable, look at this table. That means you've integrated to the point where it's like the grain in the wood. It's not bridged interdependence, where if the bridge collapses, you're back to interdisciplinary, or where they're putting a guard on either end of the bridge and say, what are you coming over here for? It's integrated and they become inseparable. So what we want to do, the magic is we're going to transform these 6 interdisciplinary functions and these disciplines into something that's completely integrated, a true transformation. Now, they often say, and I'm sure you've heard this, transformation is the order of change a caterpillar that comes through in becoming a butterfly. Well, I've heard that caterpillars have 6 legs. So let's take our 2 6-legged caterpillars, this one, and transform it into a butterfly. So we're going to take this complexity and this complexity and transform it into this elegant simplicity. Now, I know what you're thinking. Say, Mark, that doesn't look like a butterfly at all. It looks more like a ladybug. And I've got 2 responses. Number one, when we humans take something in nature and replicate it, it often doesn't look exactly the same as it did in nature. For example, airplanes don't flap their wings, do they? So, and if this does look like a ladybug, you probably heard that ladybugs are known to bring good luck. That's often manifests itself in financial success. So who in business doesn't want good luck that leads to financial success? So the magic is on the outer circle, the integration of those 30 management principles, theories, and models, our unification of all that complexity into elegant simplicity, which enables the unification of all those interdisciplinary functions and disciplines, finance, HR, quality, communications, IT, legal, governance, strategy, risk, culture, sustainability, and organization into that supervenience, that organizational intelligence, agility, and adaptability that supervenes on the people and enables them to achieve the sustainability synergy. So the last thing I'll say is I'll make a declaration that any EDU offering MBA students access to the supervenience tripod is the hottest business school in the world. And I'm working with .orgs right now to teach people how to make this shift. And I think if the EDUs and the .orgs collaborate to benefit the .coms, then we can make this world a much better place than it is, not just for our generation, but for future generations. So I really enjoyed having the opportunity to have this conversation with you. Thank you very much. Bless you all for making me feel so warm and welcome here in my 2 weeks. And I've really learned what a magical place St. Bonaventure is. And I think it's fantastic. I know not everyone here is from St. Bonaventure, but if you spent 2 weeks here, over time, you really say, this place is really special.
Thank you.
So bless you all.